Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be able to interview Jennifer Schaefer, who is one of my trainers at the RIM Institute. Jennifer is an international trauma-informed master Jungian coach and trainer. One of the things that I'm very curious about is to hear the story of when you first discovered RIM and what that was like for you.
Gosh, it was back in, I think it was 2019. I've been coaching since 2011, and I was at a Jack Canfield training event. She had written a book called Goodbye Hurt and Pain. Just the title alone draws you in,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a coach. So I had lunch with her and experienced her, and then she was offering individual sessions. So I was like, this is really intriguing. And what can it hurt? So I signed up and did an individual session with her, and I was just like, I was blown away. I was blown away by the experience and that I felt completely different. So coaching, right? We come
Mm-hmm.
in, we coach back and forth. It's very transactional, and I wanted to go deeper. I was working with women who had emotional eating issues. To come in and feel differently changes how you behave going forward, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, what was really profound for me, Nahid, is that yes, after the session, you felt differently, but it was sustained. And so, I started to show up and feel different when I was
Mm-hmm.
in conversations with people or just in my own like day-to-day life and interactions and growing a business. And it was sustained. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times, we have to have this willpower. We have to wake up and get motivated about something, but there's like a shift internally where you start to have momentum. You don't need motivation. There's like internal momentum that is just there.
So you met Dr. Deb and you had a session with her and you were very curious. And I imagine at that point you started working with her to develop the skill set, but you've stayed with her all the way up to facilitating these 6-week programs with her and being the senior trainer or one of the senior trainers. How long has that been? It's been 2019. So that's been like a
It's
lot
been
of
a
years,
minute.
right?
It has been. Yes, I was just thinking at the most recent certification that that was my seventh year coming back to the training house. And yeah, I started off as a student, moved on to certification. I just knew in my heart that this was my path, and to bring this out into the world is so important to me. Went on to masters, went on to become a trainer, and then went on to work with Dr. Deb to be a retreat lead for Goodbye Hurt and Pain, which is a 6-week online program that is so powerful, Nahid. Yeah. The people who have come through there have had big shifts, and Dr. Deb created that curriculum. Yeah, it's just beautiful curriculum.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that program because I've heard it referred to in our classes, and I heard it being like a 6-week program really dedicated to self-development, right? So I'm coming in training
Hmm.
because I want to learn it as a facilitator, right? So that I can be a coach. And of course, I'm very committed to doing the self-development along with it, but they're partners, right? It's a partnership journey. Whereas coming in and being able to just really focus on yourself for 6 weeks. Do you have a couple of examples you could share without violating any confidentiality that just to help people get a sense for what kinds of changes can happen for people over the period of that 6 weeks?
Like you were saying, as coaches, we need to do our own work
Right.
because our professional development will never outpace our personal development. And I feel like that is important for everybody. And so the
Mm-hmm.
people that have come through the program have been therapists, coaches, those in the medical profession,
Mm-hmm.
parents have come through. And, if you think about the trickle down effect, like in the medical profession, we've had doctors and nurses come through, and they're really been able to hold space at a deeper level for their patients. We've had coaches come in some coaches aren't really trained yet in holding that emotional space, and not every coach, that's not their superpower necessarily, right? There's a what I call transformational coaching, and then there's transactional coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where okay, let's find the goal and reverse engineer the goal, and I'll hold you accountable for that. But transformational coaching goes even deeper
Mm-hmm.
in, getting to those unconscious blocks. And so coaches who have come through for that personal development sometimes will go on to learn RIM as well, and carry it into their coaching practice.
I so agree with you on all fronts here. I live in the world of coaches. I'm president of our local ICF chapter this year and have been involved in that community for a couple of decades now. And it's funny because I'll often talk about how you can only be as good of a coach as you've worked on yourself. And I'm actually surprised at how many coaches only focus on the skills, and the personal development stuff is not necessarily something that they're drawn to. And that has always, always surprised me. The doctors too. I don't think doctors really get training on that emotional presence. And I think they have to have boundaries. And I think a lot of them hide in the intellectual spaces of their head just to protect themselves from burnout. So I'm so glad you have so many doctors going through and nurses going through the 6-week program.
I know it really helps with compassion fatigue,
Yeah, I
right?
bet.
And if you are very empathic, it also helps to create some boundaries that are healthy for both self and those that you work with.
I've noticed that in my class too, because I noticed that as I get more comfortable with the big emotions that happen often in the RIM sessions, it does create more boundaries, because I've always struggled with a little bit of over empathy, and sort of sometimes emotions will feel like they're bouncing off the wall and I just have to like put a bubble or something in place. But lately,
Right.
I've gotten more and more personally in my own journey, I've gotten more and more. It's okay for someone else to be having big emotions, and I can just still sit quietly and have my center and my grounding.
Yeah, which brings me to parenting. I
Mm,
cannot tell you how much RIM has changed the way parents parent,
yes.
right? Because, we're so, to a degree, of course, we need to share and guide and teach. And there's also an essence of allowing those children to grow up emotionally healthy. And so if the parents are emotionally healthy, the children are that's a role model for them to be emotionally healthy. And then the parents don't go crazy at 5 o'clock when they're burnt out from the day, working all day and being with their children and doing the homework with them if they're real young and that sort of thing. So I've seen that too in parents, that it's really shifted how they are with their children, especially their young children.
Oh, that just feels like that's what the world needs. Parenting is probably the hardest job anyone can ever have and the most stressful. And I'm so glad you're working with parents. And that brings me to this project that you mentioned to me earlier that you're involved with, called Project Heal, which I got so excited hearing about. Can you share a little bit about Project Heal?
I know Project Heal just gives me goosebumps, because I think for the most part, we did grow up in a generation where we didn't necessarily learn how to process our emotions. And so generationally, right, it's been passed down that, and it's no fault. It's just that we haven't learned how to. And Dr. Deb's created such a beautiful way to process emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So Project Heal, we go in and teach the RIM process to educators, to principals, to social workers, to school psychologists and paras, and all of the people that are in education. And, the benefit there is that they're benefiting from learning RIM and experiencing it and doing some of their own work. And then they have an internal support that supports the children. And then the teachers will bring RIM activities into their classroom and do one-on-one sessions with the children. And
Mm,
so, what I've been able to do is spend the school year supporting them. We come together weekly to discuss, what kind of activities, because it's very contextual, right?
mhm.
The classrooms all have a different dynamic, a different personality. And so we can go in and really identify, oh, this would be a really good room activity for this particular class, and also supporting the teachers if they need individual sessions.
Could you give an example of a RIM activity that I might do? Let's say I'm a fourth grade teacher, for example.
What we do, I'm thinking back to, we had a fifth grade elementary school
All right, we'll
teacher,
do fifth grade. Yeah.
and she would do a group activity. And so I think at the very beginning of the year, she introduced us, the class. They all got to imagine a special protector.
Oh, wow.
Right. And they had a little conversation with their special protector, and they could always connect with their special protector during the day if they got, if they were in a situation, say at lunch or on the playground or something like that. You could pause and connect with your special protector. I think what she also did was they got to draw the pictures of their special protectors and put them up on the bulletin board, which allowed them to visually have a connection with their very particular special protector. So
And knowing about virtual resources and just how much they support us and calm us down when we're in situations that feel stressful or scary, I can just imagine how that would make a school year so different from someone who's dealing with maybe stress or fear or bullying or anything like that.
I'm glad that you shared that, because that too was a beautiful thing to see throughout the school year as well. Those who were bullying, those who came in who had, like, didn't have the perfect home life, for instance. Some of those children needed a little extra attention. I remember there was a little boy in particular who had lost his grandfather. And so the teacher was able to have the kiddo who was starting to, act out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't know what to do with these grieving emotions. And so the teacher brought him in to do a one-on-one session. And let me just say, little kids, these young kids have just such a beautiful imagination that these experiences are really like between 10 and 15 minutes.
I've heard
And
that.
so he had a conversation with his grandfather who had passed, and his grandfather gave him some wisdom, and he embodied the wisdom, and then he was able to go back to class and not act out. And it was really helpful. I think, being seen and heard is so important, especially for children.
Yes. I so get that. And it makes me think of middle school. I've just seen, I have two kids of my own. I've kind of not only witnessed their own middle school experiences, but some of their friends, kind of what happens in middle school as they're developing, their
Right.
identity. And it seems to me that middle school is the most traumatic time of life for kids, and having something like RIM, some kind of emotional support, bringing something into middle schools that really gave these children something to ground them.
I agree 100%. I think middle school is such a tricky time for kids. It's hard. It is so hard. All the hormones, all of the needing to fit in, all of the trying, and they're trying to learn who they are.
Mm.
And RIM is a beautiful way to connect with exactly who you are and feel confident in that, so that you can be that.
Wow. So anyone who's listening to this, imagine that you could time travel back to when you were in middle school And that instead of feeling however you felt back then, you're able to tune into who you really are and be confident in who you really are. What would have been different in your life if that had happened and that had been your experience?
I know, right? And what a gift it would be to offer that to the children, your
Mm-hmm.
children,
Yeah.
kids in
And then, of course,
school,
as a parent, having had that kind of background, like if I could rewind and have been
right?
trained back when they were little, my kids would have had different experiences and they would have been a lot more confident and probably resilient as well.
Right. Yes, this brings up a story is that I was working with a woman who was a foster mom,
Mm-hmm.
and she learned the RIM essentials skills, the fundamental skills, and she would work with her foster children at night before they went to bed. She would do a little
Wow.
mini session with them, and it really did help them to resolve some of the anxieties and anger, right? There's a lot of anger that can be pent up, and RIM is a beautiful way to release that in a really safe way. And anger
Mm.
is such a healthy emotion, and we need to learn how to express it safely. And RIM really allows that to happen.
Can you give an example of what that might look like? How might they experience that?
Again, if you bring in that virtual resource, the special protector,
Mm-hmm.
allow that child to express freely to that special protector or to whomever shows up in their imagination. It releases all of the pent up emotion, and it releases out of the body. So I even had, oh, this is interesting. So I had a young 8-year-old. His dad came to me and he said that I don't know what to do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a session with him. Maybe it was 15 minutes, brought in a special protector, and the special protector gave him an anger management plan. This 8-year-old.
8-year-old. Wow.
Yes. So the 8-year-old special protector came up with an anger management plan, and he started following this. And his dad came to me 2 weeks later and he's like, "What happened?" Because he was a different kiddo. And that's what his dad
Wow.
said. He's like, "My son is a different kiddo. It is amazing. Like what happened?" And I'm like, it really does show that young kids can resource themselves. They just haven't learned how yet. And
Yeah. And one thing that fascinates me about what I've heard you and Dr. Deb say about working with children is that these sessions that for adults it could last up to 2 hours, with children are 15 to 20 minutes often because their
yeah,
imagination is so close to them. But that's fascinating. And it makes it practical as a tool to use in school systems and in families
right.
before bedtime, right?
Yes, and here's another example is that in this fifth grade class, this teacher in particular, love her, love her, love her. She was able to use the skills to have two kiddos work out, whatever they were quarreling about. So the
Oh,
dialogue
wow.
skill was so powerful. And yeah, so I mean, I've even used RIM with couples in their
Mm-hmm.
relationships and women's groups, like to bring forth some creative ideas on a project that they've been working on, and also to help heal some communication dynamics that went awry.
When you do that, is it like two individual sessions or is it done in a group way?
So it's all contextual, right, Nahid?
Yes.
So whatever shows up is what we follow, and so yes, yes, and yes.
Yes, yes, and yes.
And what was really beautiful, I'm thinking back to a particular group of women that I did a group room session with. So they all had their own individual experience. And then with their eyes closed, we went around and they also continued. It was like kind of like a group session, like you would, if you will, like an individual session, but it was with the group. So it was so interesting. I wish I would have had the sense to record it because it was just so powerful.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, it sounds like, as I hear you say yes, yes, and yes, and then I hear you give this example, it sounds like there's almost no end to the creative ways that this can be applied. And I'm only at the stage, I'm at the beginning. I'm like 4.5 months in. So I'm learning, very specific skills with very specific scripts. And I'm at the point where I'm learning to set those scripts aside, but to know them and then sort of loop them together based on the context. Let the context inform what I use, but I'm still sort
Right.
of working with those basic techniques at a very elementary level. So then I hear about you sort of 7 years in, right? And some of the really creative things you're able to do with this basic skill set that Dr. Deb always says it's simple, but it's not easy. And I've experienced that too. But it's so cool to hear all the creative ways that you're using it.
I know what's really fun too, Nahid, which I think you're gonna, as you continue learning, is that it also becomes a way of life. So we show up as if we're in a RIM session, whatever shows up, we work with instead of resisting it or
Mm-hmm.
contracting away from it or wanting to run away from it or wanting to numb from it. It's like, oh, this is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So living in a rim-like way allows you to see the opportunities that are there instead of the, like for those of us who have anxiety, there's fear underneath.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we need to have something work out in a certain way that we think it needs to be in our head. But doing this work, especially for 7 years, it's like, oh no, like I don't want to control what is about to unfold because I know what is going to unfold is going to be way more creative and serving than if I were to mold it into a certain way, if that makes sense. So I
Yes.
think all of us who have that, or up until now, I don't have that anymore, but there was a sense of, especially when I was a young mom, I need my children to, show up in a certain way, and I need to like mold that into the way that they need to show up in certain situations, and that would like be anxiety driving,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But the anxiety that I had was creating anxiety in my kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's all connected.
It is. It is. It's interesting. Yeah, thinking about my own parenting journey and now going through some of my RIM training, and I see the things that I'm working through, and I see them in my kids too. And I think, well, maybe the next Christmas present is going to be RIM sessions for them with you and Mike and some of the people that have done this. But it is interesting how your emotions are contagious, and what you try your best to be a great parent, but whatever you haven't dealt with yet, your kids are going to absorb in some way, shape, or form. So it's interesting because I coach leaders, and as I was listening to you talk about the energy shift, one of the things that I think sometimes is completely surprising to the leaders I coach is that their teams are playing off their energy.
Oh,
And
100%. Yes.
and when I share that, I mean, they don't even have an awareness of what energy they're really emitting or how their team is responding to it. So we'll use tools like 360 assessments to even help them get some of that feedback. But as you were talking, I'm thinking, yeah, I would need almost a couple levels of really practical translation to help them understand that that's even important to shift their energy. And I think I've gotten a little bit more successful at explaining how that happens for them. But it is funny how many people who are in leadership positions, and I would make that percentage very, very high. Easily
Right.
80% of people in leadership positions are clueless about how their energy impacts everything. Even the really good leaders probably aren't 100% sure why they're naturally more inspiring than, this very skilled person that's super knowledgeable and super educated and it's a peer, but their team keeps leaving them.
Oh my gosh. Yes, indeed. Well, think about that too, because 95% of our behavior is unconscious
Mm-hmm.
and 5% is of choice. And so think about the underlying uh, program that's running in some of these folks, especially I think in leadership, right? Because it's so logic based. They're living out of the left side of their brain, and
Mhm.
every day is, turning the right side off, in a sense, the emotional side, the intuitive side. I guess that's the real important part, is that it's the intuitive side. They don't necessarily intuit like on a personal level. They definitely are creative in creating, what's the next plan, using their brain in that way, but moving into that intuitive, connective part, a lot of times I think it's been shut down. They've been, it could be shut down because of trauma, or it could just be shut down from not, you don't use it, you lose it. Right? From
Well,
that
exactly.
perspective.
I mean, in these organizations, everything's moving so fast and it's results, 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 results. And everything has to be very visibly attached to results. And because the only thing you can really measure is outside of people, then, it's an ongoing challenge to get people to really value those internal shifts. Although I think as a society, we are moving a little bit in that direction.
Right.
Um, just over the last decade, I think people have become a little bit more aware of that. But yeah, it's a journey still. Lots of opportunity out there still.
Yeah, I think RIM allows leaders to get into their intuitive sense that
Hmm.
connects in a different way. It connects emotionally. And I know a lot of leaders, of course, are afraid of emotion, just because it's, again, it's not something that we've learned how to be with in the past. And it's a game changer. It's a game changer. It's like when you show up with the energy, it is contagious.
It's interesting. I'm thinking of a couple of my leader clients, and I have one who is very naturally just like this. He is very connected emotionally. He has a strong spiritual connection. And I've been with him for the last several years and watched him. And he just so naturally gets promoted in his companies because he's the only one that can capture people's hearts and inspire them. And he is around, number crunchers and people that just can't communicate in ways that are inspiring at all. It's just interesting how being able to understand how powerful that emotional and intuitive realm is, and understand how to channel it, and understand how much more you're going to impact people and how much better results you're going to get just by tuning into that part of your brain and into your body would be powerful for leaders, I think.
I agree. Elevating emotional intelligence changes everything. It changes how you show up in business, it changes how you show up in relationships, and it also changes in how you show up in your relationship to yourself.
Yeah, and I think emotional intelligence is like scratches the surface of it, and it allows people to sort of learn that there is something that is emotional intelligence that's important to leadership. And I think a lot of them learn it without actually embodying it. And that's where RIM can help.
RIM is very experiential. I think you hit the nail on the head there, because if you embody it, that's the important thing. You can intellectualize something, but until you embody it, not much changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we're talking, is there anything else that comes up to you that feels important to dive into?
When we go deeper with ourselves,
Mhm.
when we do our own emotional work, we expand our capacity to lead, to love in a compassionate way.
Yeah, so that's infectious too, right? It just sets the tone for everyone who's anywhere near your emotional energy.
Yeah, I know. And think about that. If everyone in the world had a RIM session,
Then we would not
um,
be having wars, and we would not be
yeah,
having so much political conflict.
there would be so much more collaboration, community, and connection.
And creativity,
Right.
creative solutions to some of our more complex and difficult problems.
Yeah. Well, Nahid, what has been your biggest surprise?
It seems like what RIM has given me, at least, is a landscape that represents maybe a whole side of my brain and a whole well of knowledge and wisdom that I can have access to. And I still have my left brain and all my logic and all my thinking. And I love how RIM connects the two. So it doesn't only go here and ignore
Right.
this. It takes this and introduces it to this, and they hold hands and they work together. And so it just, I guess it makes you a lot smarter, but in a in a different way.
Yeah, beautifully said. They hold hands together. They work as a team now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas especially the left brainers or the logic, the people who are really living in their mind, overthinking everything, it's stressful. And when you have the whole brain experience, it becomes less stressful.
Yes. And I would say that I can tell just from my initial experience that I've got like a long, long road ahead of me. That doesn't bother me because I've already gained so much that I know that each step of the way, there's something really valuable that comes. So I would say if anyone wants to reach you, so either they're a coach and they would just love to have a RIM experience with a master facilitator, they're curious about the training program, they're in the educational field and they'd really like to talk to you about Project Heal, how might they reach you?
Well, we can leave a link to my
Mhm.
calendar and anyone is welcome to connect with me and do a Zoom. Like I love meeting with people who especially are interested in bringing this work out. So for
Mhm.
instance, coaches, especially parents. And if somebody wants to experience a session, we can get that set up as well. And that's the best, I think one of the best things to do is actually experience it.
Definitely reach out to Jen. I mean, she's been doing this for 7 years and she's involved in so many ways. And we haven't even talked about the Jungian stuff that you've done, but maybe we'll get to that in another interview because there's just so much Jen is doing that's so fascinating that we could talk for hours. But for now, Jen, anything that we should say before we're complete today?
Thank you, Nahid, for showing up and doing this series and for showing up for yourself personally and professionally and bringing it out there because it's such a fabulous technique and everybody who experiences it, it really is, it's very experiential. So we could talk and talk about it, but I encourage you to experience it.
Yes. And so for anybody watching this, experience a RIM session, see what you think.